40 days. That's how long the federal government of the United States, the most powerful bureaucracy on Earth, simply stopped working. No paychecks, no park rangers, no airport staff getting paid to keep planes in the sky. The lights were on, but the machine was dead. It started like every other Washington standoff. Republicans and Democrats drawing lines in the sand, each pretending to defend the American people. But this time was different. What began as a routine budget fight spiraled into the longest shutdown in U.S. history, paralyzing an entire nation and then backfiring on the very people who thought they could use it to bring Donald Trump to his knees. By November, Trump wasn't the one kneeling.
The setup. When the machine stops. September had ended with no deal in sight. Congress failed to pass a new budget, meaning the government legally couldn't spend a single dollar. It's called a shutdown, but it's really more like a coma. The heart still beats, but nothing moves. Federal employees, roughly 800,000 of them, went home without pay. National parks closed their gates. Call centers went silent. Small businesses relying on federal contracts froze their operations. The last time this happened, the blame fell on Trump. Democrats counted on the same outcome again. Their logic was simple. Make the shutdown as painful as possible, and the public will turn against him. So, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer stood in front of cameras and declared, "This shutdown is the direct result of one man's refusal to govern responsibly." It was a soundbite designed to stick, but what came next would unravel that entire narrative. The move nobody expected. Instead of begging for a deal, Trump did something Washington hadn't seen before. He went around Congress. While federal offices sat in limbo, Trump's team quietly announced a plan for direct cash payments to working Americans. Not as stimulus, but as a tariff dividend. The message was simple. We're collecting billions from foreign tariffs, and we're giving some of it back to you. It was political judo. Democrats were arguing about procedural fairness. Trump was talking about money in people's pockets. Cable news laughed at it. Economists called it a gimmick. But within days, it began to stick. Polls started shifting. Americans didn't care about the Senate's procedural drama. They cared about groceries, rent, and gas prices. And Trump's message was easy to understand. I'm trying to pay you. They're trying to stop me. The economic reality. By mid-October, the damage from the shutdown was undeniable. The U.S. economy was losing between $15 and $20 billion per week, according to private estimates. That's roughly 0.1% of GDP, gone, every 7 days. Air travel delays stacked up. The IRS postponed refunds. Mortgage approvals slowed to a crawl. But the deeper damage wasn't economic. It was psychological. Americans were reminded just how fragile their government actually was. The country that prides itself on being open for business suddenly wasn't. In 1 week alone, more than 2.5 million calls to federal hotlines went unanswered. Veterans waited for benefits. Food assistance programs began cutting hours. Yet in the middle of all this chaos, Trump managed to flip the script. The Democrats are shutting down America to protect bureaucracy. I'm trying to keep America running. The irony? It worked. The fracture inside the Democratic Party. By week 5, cracks began to appear, not in the Republican ranks, but inside the Democratic Party itself. Moderate senators from swing states like Montana and Arizona started hinting that the standoff had gone too far. Behind closed doors, Democratic aides admitted the obvious. This is hurting our voters, too. Progressives wanted to keep fighting. They believed they could outlast Trump and force him into a humiliating surrender. But moderates were getting crushed by the optics. Their constituents were the ones missing paychecks. When the Senate finally held its 15th procedural vote, the numbers told the story. 60 votes for reopening, 40 against. That meant a handful of Democrats had defected, joining Republicans to break the impasse. For Trump, that wasn't just a victory. It was a moment of dominance.
The compromise. The final deal, passed on November 10, 2025, extended government funding through January 31, 2026. It wasn't a grand bargain. It was a truce. Fragile, temporary, and full of caveats. Democrats got partial funding for public health programs and a vague commitment to discuss healthcare subsidies later. Republicans got most of the spending they wanted, and more importantly, they got to claim that Trump stood firm. The real story, though, was what wasn't in the deal. There were no guaranteed healthcare subsidies. Democrats left the room with promises, not policies. That was the moment the narrative flipped. Mainstream outlets like Reuters and The Guardian quietly shifted their tone from Trump's shutdown chaos to Democrats divided.
And Trump seized it. Standing at a rally in Florida, he declared, 40 days! They said I'd break first, but I never bend for the swamp. It was part victory lap, part campaign kickoff.
The human cost. But for millions of ordinary Americans, the end of the shutdown didn't feel like victory. It felt like exhaustion. By the time federal paychecks resumed, thousands of workers had already maxed out their credit cards, taken emergency loans, or drained their savings. Some never got fully reimbursed. Airports were short-staffed for weeks. Trash piled up in national parks. The Small Business Administration reported a 40% drop in approved loans during the shutdown period. In Washington, politicians congratulated themselves for finding compromise. In the rest of the country, people were just trying to catch up on bills. That's the dirty secret of every shutdown. When Washington stops, it's the middle class that bleeds first.
The numbers behind the drama. According to post-shutdown analysis by Moody's and private consulting groups, total estimated costs to the economy, $80 to $90 billion. Average delay in federal benefits, 22 days. Lost productivity, public and private sectors, roughly 0.3% of GDP. Polling shift, Trump's approval among working-class voters rose 5 points during the shutdown. That last number matters more than all the others, because it shows that even in crisis, Trump's populist message still works. The political fallout. Inside the Democratic camp, the mood was bitter. Progressives blamed moderates for folding. Moderates blamed Schumer for mismanaging the optics. And the Biden-era centrists, already weakened by internal divisions, started losing control of the party narrative. Republicans, meanwhile, smelled blood. For the first time since 2020, they had something Democrats didn't: momentum. You could feel it in the media tone. The same journalists who, weeks earlier, called the shutdown reckless were now calling it a political reset. Even Wall Street began pricing in what investors called the Trump rebound. Stocks edged up as the shutdown ended, signaling that the markets, whatever they think of Trump personally, preferred chaos with cash flow over paralysis with principle. The strategy behind it all. The real genius of Trump's approach wasn't policy. It was narrative control. He turned a government shutdown into a referendum on loyalty and pain. While Democrats argued about clauses and committees, Trump's team focused on emotion. Who's helping you and who's hurting you? That's why the tariff dividend story mattered. Even if the checks never fully materialized, the idea of Trump handing money back to citizens created an emotional anchor. It made him the giver, and the Democrats the blockers. And in an age of short attention spans and emotional politics, that's all you need. What this means for 2026. The timing couldn't be worse for Democrats. The midterm elections are less than a year away. They enter that battlefield divided, bruised, and accused of shutting down the government for nothing. Meanwhile, Trump's approval is ticking up. Not in elite circles, but in the working class belt that decides elections. Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan. Every pollster knows what that means. If he holds those states, he holds the White House. More importantly, the shutdown exposed something Democrats hate to admit: that economic populism still works, even when wrapped in Trumpian theatrics. The broader lesson. Every shutdown leaves behind a scar, but this one carved a message deep into the political DNA of America. Control the narrative, and you control the pain. For Democrats, it's a lesson in miscalculation. They thought public outrage would break Trump. Instead, it fractured their own coalition. For Trump, it's a vindication, proof that in modern politics, endurance beats elegance. The shutdown may have cost the economy billions, but it handed him something money can't buy: the image of a fighter who doesn't blink. And that image, true or not, wins elections.
The human aftershock. Weeks after the shutdown ended, local papers across the country ran stories that national outlets ignored. A federal janitor in Maryland who pawned her wedding ring to pay rent. A park ranger in Colorado forced to sell his pickup truck. A single mother in Texas who lost her childcare subsidy and had to quit her job. These are the real costs, invisible but permanent. The U.S. government restarted, yes, but trust in it didn't. When people learn that their own government can just turn off their paychecks, they don't forget. They adapt. They save less. They vote differently. And that quiet shift, that erosion of faith, might be the most lasting legacy of this entire ordeal.
The future, a new political currency. What comes next is anyone's guess. But one thing is clear. Trump's playbook is now public. Forget policy detail. Future campaigns will focus on direct connection and tangible emotion. It's not, we passed a bill. It's, I sent you money. It's not, we compromised. It's, they tried to stop me and I won. That's how you speak to a country tired of technocracy and addicted to drama. For decades, Democrats positioned themselves as the party of governance. Trump just proved that in 2025, governance doesn't win elections. Storytelling does. Epilogue, the cost of a comeback. 40 days of shutdown, $80+ billion lost, a divided Congress, and an exhausted public. But in that wreckage, Trump found exactly what he needed: a campaign built on conflict, not consensus. When historians look back, they'll call it a budget crisis. But politically, it was something else entirely, a rebranding moment. The man who once embodied dysfunction now stood as the one who never gave in. And that's the paradox of modern America. Chaos can destroy governments, but it can also rebuild political legends.